Okay, the list of supplies that you'll need, of course, is some paper. I recommend at least 140 pound. You'll find that most of them will kind of bow in. Some might get little dimples because we're going to use a lot of water. And to help avoid that, you can kind of wet it first and let it dry and then tape it down. I prefer to keep it loose so I can move things around because I want the paint to kind of blend together. And I really don't mind that it bows. Generally after it dries, I just straighten it out. But that's up to you. You're going to need brushes, of course. I'm using the Zen Art Black Tulip. You don't need all of these different types of brush tips, but I'm just going to show you some things you can do with the various tips. You need, at the least, either a flat, that would be like this, or a round. If you have a round, it should be able to come to a tip. Alright. If you want something you can do straight lines with. You'll need something to wet the paper down. You can get your brush wet and spread the water. And in fact, I do spread the water that way, but I want to get a lot of water. I really want the paint to move. So I either use like a mister or something like a syringe, or if you have an eyedropper would work. Mister distributes a little more evenly. If you have one of these brushes that has a water barrel where you can squeeze the water out, that'll work. It isn't my favorite way of doing it, but it will work. So, and then of course you need paint, and I'm not too picky about the paint that I'm using. I'm going to use a bright yellow, a bright red, and a bright blue for my first run of colors. I'll see how much they mix. I may add some greens to that, and I will probably use a dark blue. I might even use a black, although I don't think I have a black in this palette I've picked up. I also will be using some white gouache. This because I want some opaque white. Gouache and watercolor mix, so I can also lighten my colors. And you can probably see here I've got a bunch of pre-mixed things. So I may use up some of these colors by mixing it with a little bit of white gouache to make it opaque and to lighten the color. And that will be the second layer. So for this first layer, let's go ahead, and I've already put some water in the paints I'm going to use. You can see there I've got an actual puddle of water. I don't want like the whole thing swimming in water, but I want to be able to see a puddle there, and I'm going to move the paint around, the water around a little bit. I want the surface of the paint to be a little tacky so that I can get lots of color when I'm in there onto my brush. For the paper, I'm going to spray here. Yeah, I don't know if I'll probably use up almost all the water that's in there. And I may, after I start adding color, I may add more water, depending. Now let's see. I don't know if you can see the puddle of water there. Probably not too well. There, you can see a little bit of it. I actually want those drops of water. Now I'm going to take my large flat. Again, any brush, if you do larger, it'll be a little bit faster, a little easier. Now what I'm doing is brushing that water so that it will soak into the fabric of the paper. Get it in there. And I'm going to do that until I don't have the puddles anymore. I'm going to work here, kind of spray the edges. The edges tend to dry the fastest. And Remember I was saying how the paper was going to bow a little bit? You can see that's no longer totally straight. This is decent paper. It probably won't do much worse than this. And personally, I don't find it that disturbing when I'm painting. But you can see as I take this brush and brush it again, it flattens. It'll probably bow up a little bit more. The little dimples and things that you can get with a cheaper paper can be a lot more disturbing. Okay, so I'm going to use the cat's tongue just because it's big and picks up quite a bit of paint. Start with yellow, mainly because it's the lightest. And if I've really got it good, the paint will be like enough to drip off, but if it doesn't, I just touch it. And you can see how that's just really exploding. It's not dripping. I probably could have used a little bit more water yet, but I'm not going to worry about that. And what I'm doing, you can see I have my hand. I want this to be loose. I'm not trying to do anything really controlled. And I'm just kind of taking and tapping that to the paper. Oh, and I forgot. You need some kind of a napkin or something to kind of brush off your brush in between the colors so that you don't mix colors. Yellow's really in there. Okay. And now we'll do some red. And got it in there. Got my hand up here, a ways up above that ferrule. I could even hold it this like that because there's no control here. I'm just tapping. I'll get a different kind of effect if I tap with the tip and different if I tap with the flat. And I want these colors to run together. They're not running very much. Things are drying out pretty fast. So I'm not totally surprised that I'm not getting more movement. Gonna get that mister out. And mist it. Now the more water, the brighter the paint will look when you first put it on, but the lighter it will dry. By adding that misting like that, I may be taking more of the color out than I really want, but I want more of a flow, so I'm going to risk it. And that's a decision you can make as the artist. You control by how much. Now see, that's really flowing nicely. Let's get some purple in there by mixing that. And I'll get some here. And I'll probably turn this into water. Okay, that's. Let's get some sky up here too. Now that's definitely needs some more paint. That kind of scumbling effect there, I'm not really getting all the water that's on my brush. It's called dry brushing or scumbling. And sometimes you want that, but at this point in the painting, you don't really, because it's too soon and we'll be painting over a lot of things and you just lose the effect. So it isn't that you want to totally avoid it, but it's not going to be of a lot of use because you're not going to use it. Okay, let's put a different red in there. This is a warmer red, this is a cooler red, so you get a different effect. And when you mix it, you get different colors. See, I'm using the tip of that. We'll do more of that kind of using the tip of that when we let this dry and do our second layer. And okay, let's put some green in there too. I'll get some green. Now you need to be careful. Got the 3 primary colors in there, and then you're adding green. This is sort of a yellowy green. And if you mix it too much and you get all 3 of the colors mixed together, you're going to start getting mud, which, you know, okay, so this is a landscape and you might well have some mud, so it isn't the end of the world, but you won't have those nice bright pure colors. It's also fine to leave some white if you want to. You can always add a little bit more color to it later in our next layers, or you can just leave it white, make it snow, or make it some white flowers. Yeah, this paper is really drying fast. The humidity, more so than the temperature, makes a difference to what's happening. You'll find that something that might work for you perfectly one day doesn't the next. Just because of the humidity. Even if you're working in the same place with exactly the same tools, you might get a different effect just because of the humidity. It's one of the both the frustrating and the fun things about watercolor is how it's affected by almost everything. So now I'm letting that's kind of a green that kind of turns, it was an olive green, and as it mixed it kind of turned into almost a brown. Now I'm letting it go into that blue. I'm of a mind that I'm going to make most of this blue turn into water, and so I don't mind having these drips here because they're going to turn into reflections. And in fact, I'm gonna make it where I get some more of those. There we go. Okay. Alright, now we'll just let that dry. These colors are going to lighten, as I mentioned earlier. Water, we used a lot of water. Water is brighter than the pigment in the paints. So as it dries, the water evaporates and the colors get more dull and lighter. That isn't to say that it will lighten a whole lot. It depends on the paint itself, how much pigment is there in it. The pigment in particular, some pigments just stay brighter. The paper, depending on they have sizing. There are a lot of different things that can make a difference. So we'll just see how this all turns out and how bright it stays. I know that I've got a paper that makes the paint stay pretty bright. The colors themselves tend to stay bright. So we'll just see how much water I used if it all stays this bright. In a way, I hope it doesn't stay this bright, because then when I go to layer, it's harder for detail to be seen. But if the colors don't lighten, then I'll create detail with the white gouache rather than using darker colors. And then where the lighter colors are, I'll use darker color for my detail. So all told, it's pretty easy to work with one way or the other. Yeah, that isn't moving too much. Okay, I'm going to let this sit and dry probably for at least half an hour. because I want it to be really dry, because otherwise I'll pick up the paint rather than painting over it when I go for the second layer. And I'll show you how to make some marks while we're waiting for this to dry. A lot of things you can learn out of this, and you're going to be having fun at the same time. So while we're waiting for that to the paint to soak in, I'm going to show you some of the marks that I'll be using. Now this will be later. To begin with, it's going to be very abstract. So I'm just kind of scooping up some paint here. This is not paint that is the thickness or as watery as I like it. Okay, let's get that. Okay, I'm going to use this as a cat's tongue brush. I'm going to make use of the way it comes to this point here. See, I just have to lift it. And you get this nice point here. That's one mark that I'll be using. Okay. And then I'm going to use, this is a nice way to use up some paint that I've got left over from other projects. Some of these colors may be kind of ugly, but that's because they were specific mixes. Now, this time I did try to make sure that my paint was not too wet, because I want to make my brush splay. That you can see kind of these little indentations where the tips of the brush has kind of separated, and you get some little marks there because it splays. It's always going to be a little bit different because it depends on your brush and how it splays, and if you put pressure you can get some different marks. That's the other thing when you're mark making. The amount of pressure that you apply makes a big difference. Now I was using the flat of the brush. If I use the tip of it and gently, you don't want to break your bristles, kind of tap, then I can get even more marks. I'll probably have more paint on my brush when I actually do this. Like I say, I'm not trying to make it as thick or thin as I would normally be doing. Okay, now we have a liner brush here. Pick up some. Liner brush. Liner brush is a brush you really don't use too often because what it's for is nice long lines. Now I do need a little bit more water to get a decent line there. Get that paint worked onto it. Now there we go. Okay. Then your round brush, which is kind of probably 75% of the time this is what people grab. Few people use only the flat or only a cat's tongue or some of those fancy brushes. Most people go for the round. Now I'm going to get quite a bit of color here. If you have a good round brush, despite being called round, it will taper to a very fine point. And this is one of the reasons why people like this brush and why you can get by with just one brush. Because I can make lines almost as thin as I could with that liner. It's a different kind of point here. But you can do something similar with this. You can do a broad stroke like you could with the flat. Actually, I didn't do that. You can do that with a flat if you don't have it splayed. And by just varying your pressure, very light, more pressure, it makes the bristles broaden out, and then you come to a little point again as you lessen the pressure and lift up. And then I'm going to be doing a lot of, it's not quite stippling like you have dots with a pen, but it's very similar because I'm making little round points. When I'm doing these loose and lovely gardens, I do a lot of those. In fact, I do a lot of these little dots like this. You can add a lot of character to a painting. And I'll discuss more about thickness, because when you're painting over your layering, the thickness of your paint when you're trying to do dots make a big difference. Okay, now just looking at these that I was doing earlier, how that works there, that kind of, see how you could just take that and turn, whoops, got a little too thick there, but turn this into a bird of some kind. This could become a room. We won't worry about that kind of thing for this particular work, but just to kind of show you with mark making what you can do. It doesn't have to be a garden. That's just what we're going to focus on today. Okay, I also will be doing something like this on some of it. If you do any Zentangle or work with patterns, you kind of might think of other little shapes and things that would work for this. Then I'll actually wait till this dries when I add the color, but this is just a very quick little talk to show you how some of this works. Add a color in, and I'll just leave the color that's underneath will show through. We don't have any color here, but we will when we get to it. Okay, those, I think that's gonna be more than enough to get started with here. Okay, this is pretty dry, and looking at how much it bowed again here. And this is generally what I do to help straighten it out, and you can see it gets it pretty straight, so I won't have any trouble painting on it. Now I look at this and decide, you know, got 4 different ways that you could use it. Which way do I like best? What do I see out of this? I mean, we're looking in terms of these shapes as flower beds of various kinds. I'm seeing the blue. I usually turn that into like a pond or a lake or something. And this could also be sky, but I could skip the sky altogether and make this an upper part of a lake, and then kind of flowing here, little bits of water here. Hard to decide. Kind of like this is a flower bed flowing that way more than I like it this way. Okay, I'm going to treat this more like it's, say, a marshy area next to a larger bed of water. Got some flowers going here, and the water isn't necessarily connected to this water up here, but you know, the water's seeping up in places, and these are just kind of islands of land that are up there, all the flowers growing. I have no idea if such a place exists, but I'm not going to worry about it either. Okay, let's use the cat's tongue. And all of this, I was talking about that earlier, about how it's all kind of dark. There wasn't a whole lot of color shift here. It did stay pretty bright. So if I try and put more dark on here, it's going to kind of get swallowed up, and there's already a lot happening, so that brain needs some kind of contrast here. So I've got this gouache, yellow gouache, or white gouache I should say, and I'm just going to mix it. I've got a color here. That's not very pretty, but I'm going to go ahead and use it because I'll make it kind of a base. And I'm going to put a series of trees here. Now notice where I've got my hand, it's pretty much right on top of the ferrule. I tap down and just kind of flatten it, put a little bit, not a whole lot of pressure there. Lift up. Do the same thing this time, and I'm really not putting a lot of pressure. I'm going to do a little wiggling. Now you can see there's a little bit of transparency there, even though with the gouache there's pretty much that's opaque paint now, but where it really gets thin and where I was kind of wiggling it there, it's transparent, and that's kind of nice. You let some of that background in there, show in there. And I'm also lifting a little bit of this color, even though that's dry. I probably could have let this dry longer and that might not have happened, but there's this principle, it's fat over lean. Now if you paint a very light application of paint over another layer of paint, that's glazing, and you get transparency with that. That would be watery paint over watery paint, and you really have to control your water in that particular case. But if you're looking for a degree of opacity, then you want fat over lean, thick over thin. Your first layer you do watery, the next layer needs to have a little bit more thickness, less water, more paint. I kind of like it, like say there where I was showing it through and getting a little bit of blending. That just seems a little bit more realistic to me, but sometimes you want that to be totally opaque, especially for this sort of a painting. And like I say, there is a lot going on, so I'm going to be trying to unify a little bit. In other words, not quite have so many patches. Partly I'm going to do this with the water. Again, I'm going to use the white gouache, and I'm using this gouache straight from the tube. It's clumped on there pretty thick. What I'm going to do is make some ripples that make it look like the water is right up against the land here, right, you know, where the two meet. A little bit of a inlet there. I'm not worried about making this too solid, because you get those ripples like that, and they aren't. Okay. In some places it's really thick. What I'm kind of trying to imply here, of course, is that we've got some reflections. Yeah, and I'll darken this a little bit here after I've sort of picked out where my water is flowing. That's already white. I'll kind of... Now what you'll notice, of course, is that I'm not worrying too much. I have some reflections here, but there's no yellow there that's actually reflecting. There's red here instead of yellow. You know, if I were going for strict reality, I may balance that out a little bit. Okay, I'm gonna, this part of the lake, if there is hidden in here. Put a few more ripples in. Yeah, it's down there. This is kind of, I consider these abstracts, kind of painting practices. Normally I do them when I am testing new colors, trying new paper, trying to find out how things work. Because I think I've already mentioned, it's a good way to do that. You learn a lot about how the water or how the paint and the works, what the flow, you know, how much color shift is there when you're using this paint and this paper together, and how easy is it to lift. I'm not going to worry about lifting color. That was where I would take a damp brush and I would hold it against the paper and then dab with a Kleenex or something and pick up some of the paint so that it was a lighter color. Because that's one of the things you need to know about your paper and your paint. And you could actually do several of these. Like I say, humidity makes a difference. But for the most part, I've let the paint and the paper kind of do what they want to do, and I'm not going to stress too much about reality. That's not what these are about. Okay. I haven't decided yet if this is going to be water or if that's going to be sky. I think it may be sky. And having said that, I have this lighter blue from way back when. I'm not even sure if that might be gouache. That kind of a lavender. I like that. I'm going to put that up in there. You can see where I was touching it when it was wet. It's kind of hard when I've got the camera on. I'm actually working around my tripod. Yeah, it makes me a little bit more clumsy, a little bit harder to control some of this. Now, since I'm going to make that sky, I'm going to put some lavender in here. Again, I'm not worrying too much about where. Okay. I think I need to unify a little bit more because this is still a little hard for the eye to function around. So I've used the blue that I originally used. That happened to be, I believe, a Cerulean blue. I could be wrong about that, but don't have my chart right here at hand. Now, what I'm trying to do is sort of make this like into a larger combination of shapes. Still got the reflections there, but there's more water. And it would also imply a deeper body of water. Because the light can't get through as much when the water's deeper, and therefore you get deeper water. I think that's how it works. Somewhere along the way, that's the notion I took, so okay, let's get a little blue here. Okay. Okay, with the flat brush, I want to kind of force some splaying here. You see, like when you put pressure there, how the bristles move apart. I'm going to use a fairly dark color. I wish I'd thought to put my chart up here. I think this is the color I want. Yeah, looks like kind of a phthalo green or something. Okay, I'm holding it up here towards the top of the ferrule. When I set it down, it's going to be very little splaying at all. Put it down and I add pressure to try and deliberately make it splay. And it's not splaying too much, a little bit, but I think I got my paint a little too wet there to really get what I want. Also, since I'm, as I said before, I'm working around the tripod, I'm not at quite the angle that I would normally be doing this. So this time I'm going to kind of go more against that and just make some shapes here. And let's kind of use the shapes there. What I'm doing is running out some of the green. I want it to be a drier brush. So this time, since I really want it to splay, I'm going to physically work at it there. Get the paint on me instead of in the brush. And yeah, just pressure and lift up. Pressure and lift up. Pressure and lift up. You're flicking out and lifting up. Flicking out and lifting up. And you can see, didn't get it really dark, but got these little shapes in there. Okay, so these are going to be more of a trunk. Let's give it a little bit of shape there. Giving it in the center, it's going to be the darkest. And we'll grab, now I dab that up and down in the paint very gently. I don't want, there was some hair in that paint. Barely got any paint anywhere except right on the tip of that. Gonna tap it down. And kind of do the same pressure flick, pressure flick, pressure flick, pressure flick, pressure flick, pressure flick, and do some tapping in there. And now, here we go. Going to use sort of purple. Getting quite a bit on there, although I don't know if it's thick enough. Okay, let's I'm holding it about the top of the ferrule. And kind of tapping. Really not using very much pressure. I'm just kind of getting the very tip of my brush. Now, you may have figured out I chose purple to put right there around that yellow because those are complementary colors and that really makes that yellow pop. But I don't want to put the purple into the yellow too much because then you get the kind of neutral colors. I'm just going to do a little bit of it. Okay. Let's grab some more paint here. And in fact, I think, okay, just make a little, I don't know what kind of plants these are, but what the heck. It's all about the mark making. You just make marks. The main thing, I'm not so worried about what marks I'm making as trying not to damage my brush when I do them. That's why I've stressed that I'm not using a whole lot of pressure. I'm really not, for the most part, trying to put a whole lot of control. You know, I'm not looking for like real straight lines. Put too much pressure on your bristles, you can break them down. Okay, now this is the lighter side. So I'm just doing a little tiny. Now you see I'm holding closer instead of at the top bristle. I'm using this more like a pen to do these little tiny marks. This is, if I want control, I do it by holding closer rather than adding more pressure. Now you'll find that easier to do with some brushes than others. You notice how it kind of swells here. Most of your watercolor brushes will have something like that. That's creating a balance. And because everybody has different sized hands, part of really finding the tools that work best for you is finding ones that have a really good balance. I think these have a good balance for a lot of people. But that's something you'll just have to kind of play with. You can get used to a balance. You may have a brush and you use it long enough and you'll get used to it. Okay. Or you may pick up a brush and you'll just go, oh, this is the best brush ever because it just fits my hand so well and it's so easy to paint with. That's partly the bristles, but a lot of that can be put down to the balance. Okay. Now, here I'm, again, very little pressure. But I'm using, rather than the tip, I'm using like probably about 1/4 of the side of the brush. And I'm just very lightly, in essence, I'm letting it pick up some last little bits of color. It's not going to do really dark. Give it a little bit more interest to the water here. grab some orange. I want to give some definition to these plants up here. I'm going to do like some half circle sort of things. Okay, I need something, more paint, more. I'm really running my brush into the paint. Okay. Well, I see my camera turned off. I hope it didn't turn off too long ago. That's very frustrating. Okay, I want some dark blue, dark. I wish my camera made more noise when it turns off, because you know, I'm looking down at my painting and not really paying attention. I look up and notice that it's closed up. I'm going to put a little bit of blue under here. That's in the way of a little bit of shading there. And another thing, this has got a nice tip on it here. So now I'm holding it fairly close to the bristles, putting it where I'm using the very tip and lightly drawing lines. I don't care if they're totally solid. In fact, I kind of like them not. Okay, yeah, I got a little bit of blue there, but it's not going to be too dark, so I'm going to give a little bit of a base here. Now I want to get a feeling of a little distance between these trees here, so I think if I make this a little darker in here, outline those trees a little bit. Tapping. That was fairly watery, so that's going to fade a little bit. I may come back and make it darker, but I want to give myself a little bit of guessing room. Okay. I like what happened when I added the white over there, so I'm going to add some white over here too. Now, I did those little tippity bits there. I'm going to do it with the white gouache here. And I'll do even smaller. Got some kind of like silver tipping or something going on in here. I'm mainly doing it in the greener parts. This is kind of where I was talking earlier. Now this white makes things pop because there's so much dark intensity over in this area. That white will fade a bit. I may come back and add more, or I may not once I see how it dries. I can control a little bit more by making my gouache thicker. Then I would know that it was going to stay darker. But at this point, I'm playing around is what I'm doing, and that's kind of what I think people should do, especially in the beginning. But a lot of people, they like having more control and having things just work out exactly the way they planned it. That's not me. It might be you, and that's perfectly okay either way. But I'm definitely not the person you should look for precision, because it just isn't in my nature to worry too much about that. Need some more gouache. Okay. I want to have a pink. Got that gouache. Let's mix it with. Oh no, that went really ugly. I don't know what these mixes are. I grabbed this palette. It's one I haven't used for quite a long time. And I really have no memory of what colors. I believe these are some Da Vinci colors, but I'm not positive. Okay. Alright, we got some pink here. I know that I want it to be a little bit thicker. I do, I really do. Okay. Let's using the very tip of my brush, holding closer to, actually I'm not holding on this one, I'm not sure why. Holding up close to the top of the ferrule. I'm at the point when I'm painting that I don't think about where I'm holding it or what I'm doing. Occasionally, if I think something's really tricky, I might stop and think about how do I want to hold my brush, but it's kind of instinctive, letting the muse tell me what to do. Okay. I'm going to make white dots here. I'm going to take it here. I'm going to put thicker white right in the middle there, so that this word for that is modeling. I want something to have a little bit of dimension. The closer it is, the lighter, and then it's kind of fading off. So this trunk, it gives it a little bit more depth, a little more roundness, because of the way that I have the light and dark intensity towards the front of it and having it fading off to the sides. Now these, I don't have any real modeling. They're pretty flat, and that's okay. I am happy with it being flat there. Okay, most of my white ended up fading here. So I really don't want a whole lot of white. Mostly I wanted some differences in the darkness, lightness. I hadn't put any here. I'll put a little bit. Gonna press down and give myself thicker than I left. Give it more of a ripple there. Now using the tip. Okay. I'm gonna add some blue. I put those ripples there to make it water, but like reflections, but I think it needs using a darker yellow to give a little bit of depth here. And we're going to, what kind of flowers do we want here? I think, now I'm using like about, you know, just the last eighth or whatever so of this, and tapping down. I want that tapered tip to be kind of making my shapes, my mark making there. So we're having kind of like big tree or shrub like shapes here. And I'm going to use the same red that I had there and get in here and kind of just very lightly tipping here. Like that alizarin crimson plant is kind of overgrowing into the yellow. Dots and stripes are kind of, people kind of don't think a whole lot about them because they're sort of common and easy to do, but there isn't a whole lot more effective than dots and stripes, especially in an abstract. It's amazing how much they can add to things. And with that in mind, let's take, I'll take this more orange, mix it up there with the white, and let's, it doesn't show it too much. I'm going to do sort of batches of little petally flowers. Now, because this isn't realistic, in reality, this looks like it's quite a ways away. We really wouldn't probably see those petals so much. But I'm depending more on pattern and repetition in this painting. Reality really, you know, I'm doing a few things to kind of try and make your brain think, oh yeah, I've seen something like that. But you probably haven't, because I'm pretty much just playing. Let's pick up a little bit more yellow here. Change our petal look a little bit. I kind of like how that, from that yellow, and then this yellow comes over here. And I had a little bit of, when I first put the paint down, it kind of spiked, and those actually dried in. I'm going to take advantage of that now. Instead of doing little spots, I'm going to do some stripes, little lines. They're going to pretty much fade because they're so thin, but not totally, enough that you can kind of see them there. Add a little bit of interest to that background. In fact, I think I will add some more of those over here because I like them. Now, you can do this kind of a painting 1,000 times, quite literally, because that initial dropping of the paint, even if you drop it in pretty much the same places with the same colors, the paint's going to do something different. It's never going to be exactly the same. So like if you've been trying to follow what I'm doing here, you're still going to come out with something different. You know, let that happen. You know, if you start making a mark and you go, hey, I kind of like that, it's not what she's doing, hey, go with it. This is not meant to be exact. I think I've said that. Go with what makes you happy, what works for you. And if you don't like the marks you're making, don't get discouraged, because some of this does take some time. It could be your art supplies. A lot of people blame themselves for things, especially if you're using the cheaper things. I actually believe that you can use cheaper quality art supplies and do some fabulous stuff. You just have to learn what they can do and what they can't do. So, you know, if you've been doing things for a while and you're thinking, I'm just not learning, well, it may be because you're trying to do the wrong thing with the wrong supplies. If you can't afford really good paper and paint and brushes, look at what does work. Just play. This is, like I say, this is a really nice way to just really get in and make your paint do everything you can think of, and make your brushes and your paper see what they really can do, and then decide what works for you. Some paper you won't be able to do that initial wash because of the way it's sized, especially if it is not watercolor paper. If you're doing this on mixed media, you may not have any luck, because some papers just absorb the paint. You know, I'm really thirsty, and what you get is just definitely not that real loose flow. Let's brighten up that one really nice ugly color I managed to create. And we'll brighten it with a darker color, that kind of longer grasses there. And it's not totally a bad color. In fact, there's some golden overtones there that I kind of like. Just don't like too much of it. Okay, that looks better. And I think I'll bring some of that kind of grass over here too. I'm holding fairly close to the bristles. And let's add some tree trunks back here. Branches. Using very light pressure on these back here. Now my camera tells me that my battery's almost gone, which surprised me since I put in a freshly charged one. But I think I can probably say that I'm getting close to being done here. Really, you can kind of go on with this forever. I'm going to do a little lighting here. Okay. Okay, I think that I'm going to call this done. Like I say, you can just go on forever and ever and ever if you want to. And I have a tendency to want to do that, but it ain't necessary. Let it sit. You can always come back later if you have something that's really nagging at you. So I hope you enjoy this, and I hope that you decide to give this a try, and you have like an Instagram or Facegram. Actually, if you use the hashtag Life Imitates Doodles, I occasionally go out there and search on that. I'll do so for a week or so after I do this, and check out what you've done. Thank you very much.